Hey, what's up? It's your boy Sperry, and I'm bringing you guys another rant because I know you guys love my rants and I love making them. So, this one is going to be a generalized rant on comparing Toontown to other MMOs that are more popular and more successful in the genre, namely World of Warcraft, but you've also got things like Final Fantasy. I don't even remember what number it is, I think it's like 14, but the MMO for Final Fantasy. And then you got all your fucking free to play MMOs. You know, you got your Rift, you got your RuneScape, you've got your there's like big ones I'm missing. There's like Elder Scrolls Online, there's like Arcade, there's Black Desert. Let's just say generalized comparison between Toontown and most of the hard-hitting MMO titles. The parts that I think Toontown nailed, the parts that I think were really good, we'll talk about, and we'll also talk about the parts that I think they basically fucked up on and that are really bad in comparison to other MMOs. So, I'll try to keep this one not super long, so I'll just talk about what I consider the most important. So, why don't we start with something that Toontown's better than other MMOs at, in my opinion, so this video doesn't just feel like a hating video, because that's not what I'm trying to do here. So, let's go with one of the best things about Toontown in comparison to other MMOs is the sense of community that you feel. I honestly feel like a lot of it actually has to do with the size of those text bubbles. It's so easy to just sit on this game and chat with people. The game mechanics don't take a large amount of your mental capacity, so you can really get involved in deep conversations with those around you and your friends if you choose to. And while you're playing, it's very easy to talk. You can actually talk while running in this game because you don't use WASD, which is a very underrated feature of the game, I think, that you can actually run around while typing. If you're playing WoW and you're running around questing, you can't stop to type because you're using WASD to move. Because you're using the arrow keys to move in Toontown, you can actually you can actually type while moving, which allows conversations to be pretty effortless. And there's a lot of skills like that in the game, but they did a really good job of making the game very chat, community interactive. Really, it feels like you're just doing these gameplay elements while basically having a conversation with your friends. If you have a good group of friends, that's what the game feels like. I have not found another game where I really just felt like I could just sit there and constantly type with my friends while playing, and it wouldn't impede the gameplay. So I think that was a very impressive feature. Now, certainly you can do that in other games if you use voice chat, but again, it's still kind of distracting because the gameplay is more intrusive and complicated. So I really do have to give Toontown props on the ability to have these player interactions and friendships be as good as they are. And additionally, I think they did a pretty good job making the content they do have replayable. This sounds dumb to say, but generally speaking, most of the player base doesn't seem to mind replaying the content available. I can tell you that is definitely not the case in a lot of MMOs. People get very frustrated and bored doing even the same thing twice or three times. It seems like people are only doing Toontown, 70 or 80 times to max. So whatever they did, I think it actually the content. It's not the highest specificity or caliber, but there are some mechanics in the game that make people want to replay it. So they did something right there. Also, they have some unique progression systems in the game that I think were very cool and interesting, such as the gag system, where you basically level up your skills by using them. That is actually not found in a lot of MMOs. I know for a fact in most of the big ones right now. It is found in some RPGs, but not a lot of online RPGs. The idea where you actually level up your skills by using them as opposed to by completing quests. It's a nice element to the game, and I think it works well for the turn-based as well. In Wizard 101, you definitely don't have that. You don't have any incentive to really use your stuff. I thought it was an interesting thing. Gag training is one of the most fun things in this game, most addictive things in this game for a lot of people, from experience of what I know. So, and they did a pretty good job there. Some of the elements of where collecting cards, collecting rewards, all that stuff, they have very interesting and unique ways to grind in the game, which you need in an MMO. If you don't have interesting and unique ways to grind, the game just kind of dies once you beat it. Because Toontown does a good job of not dying. I would say at least half of the active players have beaten, the storyline, but they just still play for the end game. So they're doing something right there. Not to say that there are not going to be some criticisms we get to later, but they are doing some things right. So best parts of Toontown, just to summarize, the parts that it does a good job on compared to MMOs. Very easy to multitask while playing. You can easily watch TV while playing. You can easily browse the internet, watch a movie, even maybe do some homework if it's very light thinking homework. You have a lot of abilities to multitask while playing the game because you don't need to click constantly. A lot of replayability. considering how little content there is, especially. The player interaction and friendships really make this game what it is. Not saying that there aren't some, annoying fucking people, but when you get the right group of people, that's really what makes the game. And then you've got a very relaxing nature. It's not a very high stress, high pressure MMO. You're not constantly on the edge of your feet thinking you're about to fucking die. And then the unique progression systems were good. So those are all the things that I think Toontown either does a great job or a good job compared to other MMOs. Now, let's get to the reasons and the ways that Toontown is worse than other MMOs when compared head to head. So, the non-gameplay elements, we got graphics, music, lore, we got all that. Those are not up to the standards and caliber of Toontown's competition. To be fair, it did come out a little bit before a lot of the popular MMOs today, but even MMOs from the time period, the lore, there's just no story to it. It makes no sense. Everything is completely random. It's just not explained. If you take a game like World of Warcraft and compare the lore of that game, which comes from the Warcraft universe admittedly, but you take all the lore from the Warcraft universe and try to compare it to even like a tiny speck of the lore in Toontown, it's embarrassing. It's very lore light for being a role-playing game, very lore light for an RPG. The graphics have not been significantly updated. They're cartoony, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the biggest problem with the graphics is not the fact that they're cartoony, it's that the animations are constantly reused. There's very little variation to the way the characters move and look. The running animation is always the same, the jumping animation, it just feels very unnatural and dated. It came out a really long time ago, to be fair. I'm just saying that in comparison to the competition at this point, the graphics are a bit of a letdown, particularly the animations, not so much the cartoony style. And then the music. The biggest problem with the music isn't so much, again, that it's simple and cartoony, it's that there's just not enough variety. It's repeated way too many times. You have your generic battle theme in every fucking battle in the game, pretty much. And I think that is a problem. It's overkill. I don't know why they had to have so many times they use the same music. They should have tried to go for a much wider variety of music. I think that would have been a good idea, at least. And if you look at the types of music, the variety of music between other MMOs and Toontown, it's embarrassing how different it is. A lot of these have to do with budget, but even so, even though there is reason why they're the way they are is because of budget, it still doesn't deny that these are places where Toontown is deficient compared to other MMOs. Now, another problem in the game is that there's not a lot of different gameplay elements. You have a lot of ways to communicate with other players, how to have those conversations I talked about, but you don't have a lot of ways to actually interact with other players you're playing with directly. Like in WoW, you can trade with other players, you can fight them, you can do pet battles with them, you can do group PvP, you can group up to do things where you really need to rely on teamwork to survive. Teamwork is not, I've already discussed this in another video, but teamwork is not an integral element to Toontown as much as it is in other MMOs, surprisingly enough, because they didn't want to make it completely frustrating, which I understand, because there's a lot of young players. It would be incredibly frustrating if it made the game more teamwork dependent, but you don't have those same kind of interactions as you do. You don't have the ability to you can't trade gags, SOS cards, you can't truly interact with those. You're really just lining up together to fight and use your gags. That's it. There's no real way to interact. There's very linear dimension interactivity between players, and I think that's disappointing in comparison to a lot of other MMOs. I'm using WoW for most of the examples, not because I think WoW is the best MMO, but rather because WoW is the MMO I know the most about. I've played it on and off for a good portion of my life, not as long as Toontown, but I've played it on and off for a good portion of my life. Actually thinking of maybe playing it again, because I'm getting a little bored of Toontown. I'm still going to be making videos, but I probably might be not playing Toontown as much and playing some more WoW. That's a side note anyway. Don't worry, because you're still going to get videos. I just might not be on the game as much as I used to be. Little sidetrack there, but I'll get back to the main point. And then we got our biggest problems, which basically have to do with the fact that the updates don't do anything. They don't actually give any content in the updates. The updates are completely content dry. And then the updates are super far spaced apart. The standard of expectation for the companies that have run the game for so long has just been so low. Even the new HQs would be considered a dearth of content in most MMOs. Like most of the time, they'll add something like, a couple hundred hours of content, and that's considered a bad patch because they only update that every 6 months. It's like, well, you gave us 100 hours of content and WoW, but you only update that every 6 months. That's insane. That's not enough content. And for Toontown, you don't even get that. You probably get, if we're not counting rehashing, just maxing your suit, which is like literally rehashing content, you get a couple hours of new content every like 5 years. It's insane. There's just no new content to this game. There's been an expectation of there not being content for forever. There's no depth to the content. It's very linear. It's very basic. Honestly, the amount of content in this game, programmably speaking, is very low compared to any other MMO. Even I don't even like Wizard 101, and it has more linear one-time through content. The only reason why Toontown exists and is popular is because of how replayable that content is. Because standalone basic, there's almost nothing to do in this game. Everything is so fucking simple and it's super linear. The replayability is what even allows this game to exist because, like, if that makes sense. It's like a couple of battles throughout the entire thing and almost nothing changes. But somehow those battles are enough because people like to replay them, myself included. But it's just insane how little there really is to do when you think about it. If you ever compared yourself, like, I've spent time just thinking about this, all the different things you can do, all the different places you can go, all the different possible quests and possible side adventures, and even if you're just sticking to the main adventure, all the things you can do when you're max. If you compare that between an MMO that's fully developed with a big budget like WoW and you compare it to Toontown, it's staggering how different it is. So, upon comparison, what I would really say is that Toontown shows its age as a game designed for a younger audience, as a simpler game, and as a game that's not as high a budget. Because a lot of people try to defend Toontown as a very serious game, as a very hardcore game if played properly. And I understand why Toontown has merits. I still play it. I think it's a fun game. But if you really compare it to a game that's more serious in the MMO genre, you really see how much of the depth of the content there is, how much of the depth of the depth of content there is. Toontown is not a hardcore game, and I think that can be examined when looking at these features. It's still a fun game. It can still be enjoyable, but it just doesn't have anything close to the same amount of depth and really ability to dig into it. You have to. The hardest of the hardcore Toontown players might put in more hours or the same amount of hours as the hardest of the hardcore of other MMO players, but they're just not doing as much. They're basically replaying the same bosses over and over again, grinding out the same things. They're not experiencing as much. They're not demanded to have as many different skills. You probably need hundreds of more different unique skills to do shit in WoW than you do for Toontown. And I'm just using WoW again as an example. It could be any other MMO. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's just an interesting perspective to have on what this game really does right, which is be a very simplistic, very interactive, community-based game where you can really feel relaxed and you can do your thing, you can grind your things out and feel good about it. But there are really a lot of areas where this game is lacking as an MMO, and I would honestly tell anyone, if you've never played World of Warcraft before, I would encourage you to play it just to see the difference. Almost everything in this game is different aside from some of the basic similarities where you're going to be spending a lot of time grinding, you have a progression of a character that builds up, you get an attachment to your character. I think most of you will probably like Toontown better than WoW because the games are so different. I mean, in a lot of ways I actually can understand that, but I think it would just be interesting for a lot of you to see how staggeringly different it is if you've never played it firsthand. So my question to you all today, if you're still watching, is what do you think about the difference between conventional MMOs and Toontown? What do you think? Do you think other MMOs are better, or do you think they're just different? Like, what to you stands out about why Toontown is the game you like? Is it just the nostalgia factor, or are there specific gameplay or teamwork elements that really stand out that you like? Because I'd like to know specifically what draws you to this game and how you think it compares to other games. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.